Put your phone or device aside as you listen into this audio story. Best for when you're on the move, resting, or going to bed at night. We release new stories daily. Like and subscribe to. Not miss out. There's a firm that owns a piece of nearly everything you see. Your morning coffee, the gas in your car, the roof over your head, the phone in your pocket. They don't manufacture products. They don't sell services to you directly. Yet they control $10 trillion in assets, more wealth than the GDP of every country on Earth, except the United States and China. They whisper in the ears of presidents. They reshape entire economies with a single vote. And most people have never heard their name. This is the dark business story of BlackRock, the shadow power that owns the world. And the question that should terrify you is this: if one company controls everything, who controls them? The year was 1988. Wall Street was still drunk on the excess of the decade. Cocaine, suspenders, and million-dollar bonuses for 25-year-olds who barely understood the products they were selling. But behind closed doors at Blackstone Group, a private equity firm in Manhattan, something darker was brewing. Larry Fink, a bond trader who just cost his firm $100 million in a single, catastrophic miscalculation, sat in a conference room with 7 other men. They called themselves rebels. They were really architects of a new kind of empire. Fink's mistake had been simple, but devastating. He'd bet big on mortgage-backed securities without fully understanding how interest rate changes could annihilate his positions overnight. The loss wasn't just financial, it was existential. It shattered his confidence and nearly ended his career. But instead of retreating, Fink became obsessed. He couldn't stop thinking about one question. What if you could see risk before it destroyed you? What if you could build a machine, a system, that could predict, measure, and control financial danger before it even appeared on a balance sheet? This obsession gave birth to BlackRock. The name itself was a calculated choice. Black as in black box, the impenetrable algorithms that would power their empire, and rock as in bedrock, the foundation upon which all other wealth would rest. From the beginning, this wasn't about beating the market. This was about becoming the market. The 8 founders launched with $5 million in seed capital and a revolutionary idea. They would manage other people's money using proprietary risk management technology that no one else possessed. They called it Aladdin, Asset, Liability, Debt, and Derivative Investment Network. The name sounded whimsical, almost innocent, like a fairy tale. But Aladdin was no magic carpet ride. It was a surveillance system for global capital. Aladdin could do what human minds couldn't: process millions of data points simultaneously, stress test investment portfolios against thousands of catastrophic scenarios, and identify which positions would survive nuclear war, pandemic, market collapse, or the fall of governments. It gave BlackRock an advantage that bordered on precognition. While competitors relied on intuition and quarterly reports, BlackRock's algorithms whispered the future. By the mid-90s, BlackRock was managing billions. But billions weren't enough for Fink. He understood something fundamental about power that most business leaders missed. True control doesn't come from owning companies. It comes from owning pieces of every company. If you own 5 to 10% of every major corporation in the world, you don't need a majority stake to influence decisions. You just need to be in the room when those decisions are made. BlackRock pioneered the index fund revolution, quietly accumulating shares in thousands of corporations simultaneously. They didn't need to pick winners. They owned everyone: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, ExxonMobil, JP Morgan Chase, Pfizer, Coca-Cola. BlackRock held substantial stakes in all of them. In most cases, they were the largest or second largest shareholder. This gave them something more valuable than profit: voting rights. Every year, Corporations hold shareholder meetings where critical decisions are made. Executive compensation, board appointments, mergers, acquisitions, environmental policies, labor practices. Most individual investors never vote their shares. But BlackRock always votes. And when you control trillions in assets, your vote isn't just counted, it's decisive. Then came 2008. The financial crisis that should have destroyed BlackRock instead crowned it king. When Lehman Brothers collapsed and the global economy teetered on the edge of annihilation, governments around the world panicked. They needed someone who understood the toxic assets poisoning the financial system, someone who could value the worthless mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations that had brought Wall Street to its knees. They turned to BlackRock. More specifically, they turned to Aladdin. The Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage the bailout of Bear Stearns and AIG. The U.S. Treasury gave BlackRock the keys to valuing the troubled assets that taxpayers were now forced to purchase. Foreign governments, desperate for guidance, sought BlackRock's counsel. In the span of months, BlackRock went from powerful to indispensable. They weren't just advising on the crisis, they were engineering the response. Here's where the story turns darker. BlackRock was simultaneously managing money for clients who were buying the same distressed assets that BlackRock was helping the government price. This created a conflict of interest so profound that it should have triggered investigations, congressional hearings, regulatory intervention. Instead, it was quietly ignored. Why? Because no one else could do what BlackRock could do. They had become too powerful to regulate, too embedded to remove, too necessary to question. Critics called it a Faustian bargain. Governments had sold their sovereignty for financial stability, and BlackRock had purchased influence that couldn't be bought with mere money. In the wreckage of 2008, as families lost homes and millions lost jobs, BlackRock emerged stronger, wealthier, and more deeply woven into the fabric of global power than ever before. But this was only the beginning. What BlackRock did next would make their post-crisis rise look like a dress rehearsal. By 2010, BlackRock managed over $3 trillion. By 2020, it was $7 trillion. Today, it's over $10 trillion, a number so large it becomes meaningless until you understand what it represents. $10 trillion is more than the combined wealth of the bottom 50% of humanity. It's enough to buy every publicly traded company in Japan, the United Kingdom, and France combined. It's the kind of money that doesn't just influence markets, it creates them. But raw numbers don't capture the real power. The real power is structural, institutional, invisible. BlackRock doesn't need to explicitly tell a CEO what to do. The CEO knows BlackRock is watching, voting, evaluating. When Larry Fink writes his annual letter to CEOs, a document that has become more influential than most government policy papers, corporate leaders read it like scripture. When Fink started demanding that companies address climate change, embrace stakeholder capitalism, and publish diversity metrics, corporations scrambled to comply, not because they feared regulatory punishment, because they feared BlackRock's disapproval. This is where the business thriller deepens into something more unsettling. The question of accountability. BlackRock claims it's simply acting on behalf of its clients, pension funds, retirement accounts, institutional investors who've entrusted their money to Fink's machine. But those clients don't vote. They don't attend shareholder meetings. They don't write letters to CEOs demanding policy changes. BlackRock does, which raises a terrifying question. If BlackRock controls the voting rights for trillions in assets, but the owners of those assets have no say in how those votes are cast, who actually owns corporate America? The answer is no one and everyone, a diffusion of ownership so complete that power concentrates in the hands of whoever manages the system. And that manager is BlackRock. Then came the revelation that changed everything. In 2020, as the COVID-19 pandemic shattered economies worldwide, the Federal Reserve once again turned to BlackRock. But this time, the assignment was even more extraordinary. The Fed hired BlackRock to manage its unprecedented intervention in corporate bond markets, essentially giving a private company the authority to execute monetary policy. BlackRock would decide which corporate bonds to buy, propping up companies deemed essential to economic stability while letting others fail. Let that sink in for a moment. A private asset manager was now determining winners and losers in the largest economy on Earth, using government money, with virtually no public oversight. The conflict of interest was staggering. BlackRock managed funds that owned many of the same companies, whose bonds it was now purchasing on behalf of the Federal Reserve. They were essentially bailing out their own clients, using taxpayer money, while collecting fees for the service. Congressional letters were written. Think tanks published concerned reports. Journalists asked uncomfortable questions. But nothing changed. The machine kept running. BlackRock executed the Fed's mandate flawlessly. And when the crisis subsided, Larry Fink received praise for his steady hand during turbulent times. The conflict of interest was acknowledged, footnoted, and forgotten. This is the dark genius of BlackRock's power. It operates in plain sight, hiding behind complexity and necessity. Most people can't understand what BlackRock does, so they can't articulate why it might be dangerous. And the people who do understand, regulators, policymakers, financial journalists, are often dependent on BlackRock's cooperation, data, or expertise. Criticizing BlackRock too loudly might mean losing access to Aladdin's insights, which have become indispensable to anyone trying to understand modern markets. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of BlackRock's empire isn't what it does, it's what it represents. A concentration of financial power unprecedented in human history, operating with minimal democratic oversight, answering to no electorate, constrained by no constitution. Larry Fink isn't elected. He's not appointed by voters. He can't be impeached or recalled. Yet his decisions affect billions of lives. What gets built, what gets funded, which industries thrive, which communities suffer. When BlackRock decided to embrace environmental, social, and governance investing, ESG as it's known, entire industries had to adapt. Coal companies found themselves starved of capital. Oil executives faced pressure to pivot toward renewable energy. Corporate boards scrambled to diversify, not because consumers demanded it, but because BlackRock did. To some, this was progress, using financial power to address climate change and social inequality. To others, it was tyranny, an unelected oligarch imposing his values on democratic capitalism. Both perspectives miss the deeper truth. It doesn't matter whether BlackRock's agenda is righteous or misguided. What matters is that they have the power to set the agenda at all. In a functioning democracy, citizens debate values, elect representatives, and those representatives craft policy. But BlackRock bypasses that entire process. They don't need laws to change corporate behavior. They just need to vote their shares. This is the paradox at the heart of modern capitalism. The system that was supposed to distribute power through markets has concentrated it in the hands of a few massive institutions, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, who collectively own significant stakes in virtually every major corporation. These firms compete with each other for clients, but when it comes to corporate governance, they often vote in lockstep, creating a shadow consensus that guides the entire economy. And then there's Aladdin, the machine behind the throne. Over 30,000 investment professionals at more than 200 institutions worldwide use Aladdin to manage over $21 trillion in assets. That's not BlackRock's money. That's everyone's money, flowing through BlackRock's system. Aladdin has become the central nervous system of global finance, processing trades, measuring risk, and modeling catastrophe for pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, and rival asset managers. Think about what that means. If Aladdin contains a flaw, a miscalculation in its risk models, a blind spot in its algorithms, that flaw propagates across the entire financial system. If Aladdin recommends similar positions to thousands of clients, and those clients act on that advice simultaneously, markets move in herds, amplifying volatility and creating the very crises Aladdin was designed to prevent. And if Aladdin ever fails, if a cyber attack, a coding error, or an unforeseen black swan event causes the system to crash, the entire global economy might seize up with it. This is the financial equivalent of everyone using the same operating system, written by the same company, with no backup plan. The concentration isn't just in ownership, it's in infrastructure. BlackRock has become systemically important in a way that no bank, no government, no corporation has ever been. They are too big to fail, too embedded to regulate, and too powerful to challenge. Larry Fink, for his part, rejects the characterization of BlackRock as dangerous. In interviews, he presents himself as a pragmatist, a fiduciary, someone simply doing his job, maximizing returns for clients while managing risk. He argues that BlackRock's influence is overstated, that they rarely vote against management, that their power is constrained by competition and client choice. He insists that the real threat to capitalism isn't concentration, it's short-termism, climate change, inequality, the erosion of trust in institutions. But his critics see something different. A man who has built a machine that has outgrown his control, a system that has become more powerful than its creator, a company that doesn't answer to markets, governments, or voters because it has positioned itself above all three. They point to BlackRock's revolving door with government. Dozens of former BlackRock executives now work in treasury departments, central banks, and regulatory agencies around the world, while former government officials join BlackRock's ranks. This isn't corruption in the traditional sense. No bribes, no explicit quid pro quo. It's something more insidious. The blurring of boundaries between public and private power until they become indistinguishable. There's a term for this in political science: state capture, when private interests become so entwined with government that they effectively control policy without needing to hold office. BlackRock hasn't captured any single state. They've captured the system. Some call BlackRock the fourth branch of government, more powerful than the judiciary, more influential than Congress, more permanent than any presidential administration. Others call it a shadow bank, performing bank-like functions without bank-like regulation. Still others see it as something entirely new, a corporate sovereign, a stateless power that owes allegiance to no nation because it owns pieces of them all. And perhaps that's the most unsettling realization. We've never seen anything like BlackRock before, which means we don't have rules, norms, or precedents for dealing with it. Antitrust law was designed to break up monopolies that controlled specific markets: oil, steel, telecommunications. But BlackRock doesn't monopolize any single market. It owns small pieces of every market, which might be more dangerous precisely because it's harder to define, harder to challenge, harder to dismantle. Financial reformers have proposed solutions: force index funds to pass voting rights back to individual investors, cap the percentage of shares any single institution can hold, break up asset managers above a certain size, create firewalls between asset management and government advisory work. But every proposal faces the same problem. BlackRock is too useful to destroy. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, governments will need BlackRock's expertise, its data, its risk models. Aladdin isn't just a competitive advantage, it's critical infrastructure. And you don't tear down critical infrastructure during an emergency. So we're left with a paradox wrapped in a nightmare. The company that's supposed to protect us from financial catastrophe might be the greatest systemic risk we face. Not because BlackRock is malicious, there's no evidence of that, but because any institution this powerful, this central, this unaccountable, represents a single point of failure for the entire global economy. This brings us to the final, darkest question. What happens if BlackRock decides to use its power not for profit, but for control? It's the scenario that keeps regulators awake at night, whispered about in academic papers and think tank reports, but rarely discussed openly. Right now, BlackRock's interests broadly align with market stability. Chaos is bad for returns, and returns are what clients demand. But what if that calculus changed? What if BlackRock concluded that a controlled collapse in one sector could benefit their positions in another? What if geopolitical tensions forced them to choose sides, using their shareholdings as economic weapons? What if the Chinese government demanded that BlackRock vote its Chinese holdings in ways that conflict with U.S. interests, threatening to seize billions in assets if they refuse? These aren't hypothetical scenarios, they're emerging realities. BlackRock operates in dozens of countries, subject to dozens of regulatory regimes, each with different laws, values, and strategic objectives. As global tensions rise, BlackRock will increasingly face impossible choices: comply with one government and anger another, potentially losing market access or facing sanctions. In those moments, BlackRock's decisions won't just affect shareholder returns, they'll shape geopolitics. And who will make those decisions? Not Congress, not the president, not voters. Larry Fink and a handful of executives operating behind closed doors, guided by algorithms and fiduciary duty, constrained only by their own judgment. This is the culmination of decades of financial evolution, or devolution, depending on your perspective. We've created a system where capital flows faster than law, where markets move quicker than democracy, where a single firm can accumulate power that would make 19th-century robber barons weep with envy, all while operating within legal boundaries that haven't been updated since before the internet existed. The lesson here isn't that Larry Fink is a villain. He probably isn't. He's a brilliant financier who identified an opportunity and built an empire around it. The lesson is that systems designed without adequate safeguards inevitably concentrate power. And concentrated power inevitably corrupts, not always through malice, but through the simple reality that no person, no company, no algorithm should have this much influence over human affairs without robust accountability mechanisms. We've built a world where the most powerful company isn't the one making products or providing services. It's the one that owns a piece of everything, seen and unseen, shaping decisions in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo to Dubai, while remaining invisible to the billions whose lives depend on those decisions. So tonight, as you lie in bed, consider this. Somewhere in Manhattan, in a building you've probably never noticed, algorithms are running calculations that will determine which companies thrive, which industries collapse, which communities prosper, and which are left behind. Those algorithms don't care about justice, compassion, or democracy. They care about risk-adjusted returns. And the people who built them, who control them, who profit from them, answer to no one but themselves. BlackRock isn't just the most powerful company in the world. It's the blueprint for a future where power doesn't need to announce itself because it's already everywhere, embedded in every investment, every transaction, every share of stock sitting in your retirement account. The question isn't whether BlackRock will abuse this power. The question is whether any institution wielding this much power can avoid becoming a threat, simply by existing. And the answer, like so much about BlackRock, remains hidden in the black box, visible only to those with access to the algorithm, and they're not telling. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.